So let's talk grammar instruction. This is something that a lot of teachers have trouble fitting into the day, and I do as well. And so what I did is I worked into my classroom a system for our grammar that takes 10 minutes a day, but also helps prepare us for when we're actually using the grammar within our own writing. So most importantly, if your students are not returning to their notes when they're doing conferences or revising with a partner or anything like that, and actually use these grammar concepts, it's not going to stick with them. So what I do the first part of the year is I start looking for things within their writing that they all overall struggle with, and those are our first grammar lessons. And then there are a few things that fit in really well with different writing types. So for example, dialogue fits in really well with narrative. So that's something that I teach, dialogue punctuation within our narrative. So the first thing I do is we do a 10-minute mini lesson. I have all my students come back to gathering place, and I do an anchor chart. Now, when I have students who have one-to-one devices, because I've had both recently, I have my students bring their devices back, and I can either sometimes do a paper one, or sometimes, if I can, I'll move back our projector to gathering place, and then we'll do it all digitally. It's the same process. So what I do is I do a 10-minute mini lesson where we introduce the grammar concept. I show some examples, and my students take down their notes. And they keep all their notes organized with a table of contents in their binder, because when we get into conferences, let's say we're doing our personal narrative conference, and I see that one of my students is struggling with dialogue, I have them flip back to this page, and we use this to correct their dialogue issues. And so this can be used in any grammar situation. So after day one, where we take our notes, day two, what we do is we do a sorting activity. So I have students take examples of correct and incorrect usage of the grammar rule, and they have to sort them based off which ones are correct and which ones are incorrect, and we go over it. That takes 10 minutes as well. Then day three, I have them do some simple correcting activities. That takes 10 minutes, including us going over it. So I try to keep it really simple, because most of all, I want them to get quick practice on this, get notes, but then take it and use it in our writing when we start to write and when we start to do conferences to revise and edit. So let's kind of take a look at what this process looks like each week, and then we'll take a look at the dialogue lesson, but I also repeat it with all my other grammar standards.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a whole lesson. So it's going to take us about 10 minutes. That's it. But you guys have to be quiet. If you have a question or a problem, raise your hand. We're going to take notes. So you're going to have to really concentrate. Okay? Okay, so we are going to work on dialogue. So last week, you guys were working on writing your personal narrative essay. Bless you. So when you wrote your personal narrative essay, we just did the first part, right? And we did the last part. But the middle part's going to be our whole story, so we're going to want dialogue in there. And so does anyone remember what dialogue is? Or can you tell from looking at the poster? What is it?
Dialogue is to make your story interesting, add to anything you want to add, and
well, look, it does make the story interesting, and it tells us a lot about characters, right? But looking at this poster, we have quotes, we have these little like thought bubbles. So dialogue, have you heard of dialogue asked the teacher? So what do you think dialogue is from looking at this then? What do you think?
Speaking, character speaking.
Character speaking, good. And sometimes it's characters talking inside their head to themselves. So you know how sometimes you have a conversation in here, it's not out loud, but it's in here, and you tell yourself something? It could be that too. So dialogue is when a character speaks, whether it's out loud or it's in their head. Make sense? Okay. Okay, so basically dialogue has two parts that are really important. So you might be able to write what your character says, but we have to make sure we format it properly. So first thing that I notice in this sentence right here, which is dialogue, is I start with this. So what is this called?
This is called a quotation mark.
Yeah, and you can see that it's curved towards the starting letter. And it ends with what?
Quotation mark.
Good, and in between the quotation marks, you have what the character says. So have you heard of dialogue? This is what the character says out loud. Okay, so this is the actual speaking part. Okay, make sure that you underline and circle on your notes. Okay, so have you heard of dialogue is the dialogue, which is the spoken portion of the sentence. So I'm going to write here, have you heard of dialogue? What do we need to have before the dialogue starts?
Quotation marks.
Good, quotation mark. And at the end, after the punctuation, quotation marks. Okay, really important. We see right here. Okay? We do not put the question mark or the exclamation point or the period after the quote. We put it before the quote. Okay? It is a part of the dialogue. But the next part is the dialogue tag. So I'm going to underline the word tag here. Oh, it looks pink. Tag right here. Asked the teacher. And I'm going to label it. Also, we talked about how people can be thinking about it inside their minds. So this is an important word to tell us, okay, how is it being said? And this way it's being said as a question. Okay, you could say screamed the teacher. Would that change how you heard the dialogue? Yeah, because when I read this, have you heard of dialogue, asked the teacher. In your mind, you think of a teacher saying, have you guys heard of dialogue? But if I said screamed the teacher, you would think of the teacher going, have you heard of dialogue? Right? So it's really important that we make sure we have a tag that shows who's saying it and how they're saying it. And sometimes we'll put in there something else that like ask the teacher quickly or ask the teacher angrily if the teacher is like really angry over something. Now we don't want to overuse those if we're adding those in, like quizzically, but we can use them sometimes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, I'll use orange, a couple of different things. Now, here we see that the tag is after the dialogue, okay? When the tag is after the dialogue, we have a couple of things. First of all, this is lowercase, okay? So circle that. We have punctuation at the end, so circle that. Here is how the English language is going to mess you up when you are writing dialogue. It has different rules depending on if the tag is in the middle, the beginning, or the end of the dialogue. So in this case, is it in the beginning, middle, or end of the dialogue, the tag? So we're going to look at 3 examples, and we're going to look at the rules for the punctuation depending on if they're a beginning, middle, or end. Okay, so the beginning, he smiled. So really important, we have the beginning, the tag is in the beginning telling us who said it. And then the reason we put a period here is because we're not saying that he asked or he said. We're just saying he smiled, which is an action, and then putting a period. And then we're putting the dialogue after it. So the dialogue has the same rules, right? It has the beginning quote and end quote. But what changed is what we're doing with the tag right here. Okay, it doesn't include this asked or said or anything that describes the dialogue, so we put a period. If you really want to do dialogue, you want to do a combination of these, but doing it at the end is the easiest. The middle is a challenge. So if you feel like you need to be challenged because you're really good at writing dialogue, this is a good place to start. So I'm not sure, and then we put a comma because we're not finished with the sentence because we're going to interrupt it with the tag. Okay, so remember, middle is like an interruption. And when you read your next book, look for where they're doing dialogue when the character's thinking instead of speaking out loud, because that's always really interesting to me. The punctuation still comes before the end quote. The quote still starts, but here is where it's tricky when it's in the middle, because you have interrupted your sentence with the tag. So here's that interruption right here. I'm going to use purple so you can see that that's the tag interruption, right? So because we're interrupting with Marla replied, we have something really different. We have a comma and a comma. Okay, and remember, the punctuation, that comma, period, exclamation point, all of those are always before the end quote. Okay, so end quote, punctuation comes first. okay? If it's coming before punctuation, it's still before it. See here? So that rule always applies. Now let's try the end. We already have an example of that here. Let's see if it has the same rules as we did up here. Okay, question mark, end quote. Okay, always comes before the end quote. And here's what we were talking about with kind of explaining to our reader what it sounds like. We're going to put Dave shrieked. Our quotes following the same rules. Did you see the size of that bird? The punctuation comes before the end quote. We got the beginning quote here. Okay, I'm going to label them here too. See how the dialogue is interrupted here? That's when it's in the middle. And you can see when I'm underlining in green, that's all the dialogue. It's following the exact same rule each time. Beginning quote, dialogue, punctuation, end quote. Okay? What is different is how we punctuate the tag. But when you are writing, you need to make sure that you come back to this in your notes page so that when you want to write dialogue, you can follow these examples. Okay, and we're going to do some to practice so that you get really good at it, but in 6 months from now, if you forget how to write dialogue and you want to write some dialogue, you can come back to these notes and you can say, okay, I want my tag in the beginning, here's how I write it. We are going to do a conference, so we will bring our poster and our notes and we'll all get to work together to look at the dialogue you've written. So today we're going to write some dialogue and then we'll come back next time and we're going to look at that dialogue and we're going to make it better, we're going to add more, and we'll do that in like a group conference setting. Okay.